Let me say, can I say one thing?
Please.
To me, the great Stanley Kubrick was an actor's enemy.
Well, he did 100 takes.
He was an actor's enemy. And I can point to movies that he's done, the worst performances I've ever seen in movies.
Robert Duvall versus Hollywood. Robert Duvall never played the Hollywood game. While other actors showered their co-stars with praise, he did the opposite, calling some of the biggest legends in cinema lazy, overrated, and even an actor's enemy. From Marlon Brando to Stanley Kubrick, Duvall's unfiltered opinions shook Hollywood to its core. And the 6 names on his list reveal more about his uncompromising vision of acting than any award he ever won. So who exactly did Robert Duvall despise working with, and why? Let's start with the clash that shocked everyone. 1. Marlon Brando. When Robert Duvall spoke about Marlon Brando, he didn't mince words. To most of Hollywood, Brando was a revolutionary, the man who changed acting forever with raw intensity and natural style. But to Duvall, Brando wasn't a genius. He was, in Duvall's own words, an actor's enemy. The tension began during The Godfather. On screen, Tom Hagen and Don Vito Corleone looked like a perfect pairing. Behind the camera, it was a different story. Duvall watched Brando lean on cue cards instead of learning his lines, sometimes even demanding that other actors tape them to their shirts so he wouldn't have to memorize a script. Duvall later admitted he tried this trick himself and abandoned it almost immediately. If you know your lines perfectly, you can still be spontaneous, he explained, emphasizing that discipline creates freedom, not laziness. To him, Brando's method wasn't brilliance. It was ego. A way of avoiding preparation while still hogging the spotlight. Even decades later, Duvall didn't let the issue go. In a 2022 interview, he flat out accused Brando of humiliating younger actors and sabotaging scenes whenever attention drifted away from him.
And this time, the wound would come from a friend, not a studio. Before they were stars,
about respect for the craft. And in his eyes, Brando had crossed the line. Brando never answered these criticisms. By the time Duvall aired them, the screen legend had already passed away. Which means Hollywood is left with one haunting question. Was Brando a misunderstood genius, or exactly what Duvall claimed, a destructive force in disguise? 2. Henry Hathaway. If Duvall thought Marlon Brando was careless, his clash with director Henry Hathaway was the complete opposite, a war with pure authority. Their battle happened on the set of True Grit in 1969, and it left scars that never healed. Hathaway was old Hollywood through and through. He believed in barking orders, commanding actors like soldiers, and running his set with absolute control. To some, that discipline produced results. To Duvall, it was suffocating. Years later, when asked about Hathaway, he shut down the conversation cold. Henry Hathaway, we won't talk about him. One moment from True Grit revealed everything. Hathaway shouted at him, "When I say action, tense up, goddamn you." For Duvall, that wasn't direction. It was artificial, mechanical, and the exact opposite of the organic, truthful acting he believed in. The set became a battleground, an old-school disciplinarian forcing control against a rising actor determined to find freedom. Duvall didn't win, but he never forgot it. To him, that experience symbolized everything acting should not be. Rigid, lifeless, and dictated by someone else's power. And if Hathaway's authority enraged him, the irony of his next feud cut even deeper, because it happened on the very film that gave Duvall the greatest award of his career. 3. Bruce Beresford. In 1983, Robert Duvall delivered one of the most acclaimed performances of his career in Tender Mercies. The role of Max Sledge, a washed-up country singer seeking redemption, won him the Academy Award for Best Actor, the only Oscar of his long career. But behind the golden statue was a collaboration Duvall found suffocating. Bruce Beresford, the Australian director of the film, was precise, methodical, and deeply committed to his vision. To critics, that dedication was admirable. To Duvall, it was suffocating. Every gesture, every delivery seemed fenced in by Beresford's boundaries. Instead of freedom, Duvall felt boxed into a cage of instructions. The irony stung. He had achieved his greatest recognition under a director whose method drained him. To critics, Tender Mercies was a triumph. To Duvall, the process felt like a struggle, pushing against a wall, trying to inject authenticity into a performance while constantly being pulled back. For him, the Oscar wasn't proof of harmony, but proof that even under conditions he despised, authenticity could survive. Still, the memory left a bitter taste. A reminder that success doesn't always erase the scars of the fight. And if Duvall thought Beresford's control was too much, what he had to say about another director's obsession with endless takes was even harsher. 4. David Fincher. Robert Duvall never hid his contempt for directors who smothered actors under endless repetition. To him, spontaneity was sacred, and nothing killed it faster than running the same line 50 times in a row. That's why when the name David Fincher came up, Duvall didn't see brilliance. He saw torture. Fincher built his reputation on perfectionism. Every detail mattered. Every take could stretch into dozens more. Some scenes in his films, like Fight Club and The Social Network, reportedly went through 40, 60, even 70 takes. Fans called it visionary. Duvall called it destructive. That's not directing. That's torture, he once quipped. The clash wasn't personal. They never even worked together. But in the mid-1990s, Duvall was quietly approached for a role in Fincher's thriller Seven. Officially, he declined due to scheduling. Years later, he admitted the truth. Maybe I turned it down subconsciously. I just couldn't see myself doing the same line 60 times. For Duvall, acting was alive in the first spark, the unpredictable moment when truth broke through. For Fincher, truth was buried somewhere in precision, repetition, and exhaustion. To Duvall, that philosophy wasn't art. It was sanding down a performance until nothing human was left. But as harsh as he was toward Fincher, the director Duvall tore into the most wasn't from his own era at all. It was one of cinema's untouchable giants, Stanley Kubrick. 5. Stanley Kubrick. When Robert Duvall called Stanley Kubrick an actor's enemy, the room froze. It was 2010, during a Hollywood Reporter roundtable, and every other actor at the table looked stunned. Kubrick wasn't just respected, he was worshipped. Yet Duvall didn't hesitate. To him, Kubrick's films, The Shining, A Clockwork Orange, weren't masterpieces of performance. They were examples of destruction. Duvall bluntly said, "Maybe they're great movies, but they have terrible performances." While others laughed nervously, Duvall pressed on, dead serious. The heart of his anger was Kubrick's infamous obsession with takes. Stories of 80, 90, even 100 takes for a single moment weren't myths. They were part of Kubrick's legend. To Duvall, that wasn't dedication. That was sabotage. How does he know the difference between the first take and the 70th? He asked, cutting straight to the point. For Duvall, a true director guided actors to truth, not exhaustion. Discipline, preparation, and authenticity were his foundation. Kubrick's method, he believed, stripped that away, leaving only fatigue. The brilliance of Kubrick's camera, in Duvall's eyes, came at the cost of the actor's soul. And while most of Hollywood tiptoed around Kubrick's legacy, Duvall's voice was the outlier, dismissing one of cinema's untouchable geniuses as careless with the very craft he claimed to elevate. But if Kubrick symbolized the director Duvall despised most, the final name on his list was a fellow actor, one of the most celebrated of his generation, whose approach to performance Duvall quietly rejected for decades. Number 6. Robert De Niro. If Duvall's battles with directors were loud and fiery, his feelings about Robert De Niro were quiet but cutting. Unlike Brando or Kubrick, Duvall never screamed about De Niro. He didn't need to. A single line said it all. He's good at playing Italians. Very good. On the surface, it sounded like a compliment, but anyone who knew Duvall's philosophy heard the dismissal underneath. To him, De Niro wasn't a craftsman of truth. He was a performer of transformations, shaving his head for Taxi Driver, gaining weight for Raging Bull, perfecting accents for Goodfellas. The world saw genius. Duvall saw distraction. Their paths crossed in the Godfather trilogy, but the contrast was stark. De Niro built a legacy on extremes. Duvall built his on restraint, listening, silence, and presence. To him, acting wasn't about how much weight you gained or how deep you buried yourself in a role. It was about being honest in the moment. The work isn't in the wig or the weight gain, he once said. It's in the silence. The divide was never personal. They shook hands at award shows, nodded at industry events, but there was no admiration. Just two titans walking in opposite directions. De Niro chasing transformation, Duvall clinging to authenticity. And that quiet rift left one lasting question. Was Duvall rejecting a new wave of acting, or standing guard over the soul of the craft? Conclusion. Across his career, Robert Duvall built a reputation not just for his performances, but for his refusal to compromise. He clashed with Marlon Brando over discipline, rejected Henry Hathaway's authority, bristled under Bruce Beresford's control, walked away from David Fincher's perfectionism, dismissed Stanley Kubrick's legendary methods as destructive, and quietly refused to revere Robert De Niro's transformations. To him, all of these battles pointed to one truth. Acting was a craft, not a circus. It demanded discipline, humility, and honesty, not ego, endless takes, or physical stunts. Where Hollywood often celebrated extremes, Duvall stood for restraint. Where others saw genius, he saw noise. But that leaves us with the ultimate question. Was Robert Duvall a purist who defended the soul of acting, or a stubborn traditionalist who refused to adapt to the changing language of cinema? What do you think? Was he right to call some of Hollywood's biggest legends an actor's enemy? Or did he go too far?